Chapter 239, 1. Observing the Waterfall. Chen Ping'an returned to the old temple, where he was responsible for lookout duty for the second half of the night. Su Yuanxia and Zhang Shanfeng didn't ask him anything, so he didn't explain anything either. Chen Ping'an faced the campfire from late night until dawn, and the flickering flames illuminated his face, which seemed slightly less tanned than before. Nobody knew what he was thinking about. The first rays of sunshine were peeking over the horizon, and the big-bearded martial artist was still sleeping soundly. Meanwhile, Zhang Shanfeng folded his blankets and discovered that Chen Ping'an wasn't in the old temple anymore. He walked out and found that Chen Ping'an surprisingly wasn't practicing his fist techniques today. Instead, he was standing still with the locust wood sword in his hand. Chen Ping'an turned around when he heard the young Taoist priest's footsteps. "You're awake." Zhang Shanfeng nodded and spread out his arms, stretching his body to loosen himself up. A morning breeze brushed through the mountains, still carrying with it a hint of chilliness. Zhang Shanfeng grabbed the peach wood sword from his back and started to practice his usual set of sword techniques. He twisted and turned, and his body followed the movements of the sword. He appeared light and nimble. Zhang Shanfeng had arms as long as a monkey's, and the transitions between his sword stances were also smooth and relaxed. From the perspective of cultivation elites outside the mountains, Zhang Shanfeng was a natural talent especially suited to practicing the sword. Of course, such a notion most likely didn't exist for cultivation forces in the mountains. These forces placed more emphasis on nurturing qi and refining qi, and all they wanted was to be able to advance through the cultivation tiers quickly enough. All they desired was massive cultivation speed, to the extent of leaving everyone else in the dust and stunning their elders. After Zhang Shanfeng finished practicing his sword techniques, Chen Ping'an was still standing there with the locust wood sword in his hand. He was very hesitant, and he couldn't launch a sword strike no matter what. During breakfast, the three of them had a discussion and decided to visit Song Yushao's Sword Water Villa together. They would rest there for a short while before asking around for the exact location of the ferry station in Water Combing Nation. Once they mapped everything out, they would then set off for their destination. Sword Water Villa was around 350 kilometers from here, and there were many towering mountains and majestic peaks on the way. Fortunately, the wind was calm and the sun was bright now that summer had arrived. Thus, the three of them could freely travel without too many worries. It wasn't long before they arrived near Sword Water Villa. The villa was located at the foot of an elegant-looking mountain. Before heading over, they passed through a bustling small town that seemed to have a continuous flow of visitors. Chen Ping'an bought some wine to fill his sword-nurturing gourd. Meanwhile, Su Yuanxia visited a bookstore, and Zhang Shanfeng was responsible for replenishing their supply of dry food and dry meat. It was only during times of need that one would regret not having enough money. The big-bearded martial artist was interested in the sole copy of a book that had been left behind by the previous empire of the nation. It was in a very good state, but the price was also exorbitant. However, Su Yuanxia was helpless to do anything due to the lack of money in his possession. At this moment, he couldn't help but feel frustrated at his modesty back in Blusher Prefecture. He should have happily accepted the 5,000 taels of silver, like Chen Ping'an. Sometimes, just a single copper coin short could become a huge and insurmountable obstruction, even for gallant heroes. Thus, the three of them continued to make their way toward Sword Water Villa. While walking over, Zhang Shanfeng mentioned a type of coin called Grain Rain Coins 1. These coins were even more valuable than lesser heat coins, and Zhang Shanfeng said that he had never had the opportunity to see them before. He had only heard about these coins. One lesser heat coin was worth 1,000 snowflake coins, while one grain rain coin was worth 100 lesser heat coins. Earth immortals at the golden core tier, or nascent tier, seemingly all used this latter type of coin when purchasing and selling immortal treasures. Most importantly, grain rain coins could also double as a beneficial and nutritious item for qi refiners. A qi refiner could rapidly replenish their qi and vital energy by absorbing the energy from these coins. As they walked, Su Yuanxia also reminded Chen Ping'an and Zhang Shanfeng about the treasures that they had obtained from killing the demonic cultivators in Blusher Prefecture. If these treasures weren't beneficial to their cultivation, then it was best that they sold them to the shops in the mountains. As long as the price wasn't too unreasonable, it made sense for them to sell them here. Using the money, they should then purchase 1 or 2 spirit tools that would benefit their current cultivation. After all, securing a useful spirit tool would be far more useful than keeping useless treasures. Just like how money was best spent on useful items, cultivation treasures were best exchanged for useful tools that could assist one's cultivation as well. Zhang Shanfeng had already thought about this before, and he replied that he wanted to buy a few offensive talismans that he had always dreamed of obtaining. It would be best if they were lightning element talismans. In addition to this, he also wanted to purchase a fairly priced Dao sword. Even though his peach wood sword could also subdue ghosts and yin entities, the fragile nature of the peach wood meant that he would definitely be in trouble if he came across extremely strong demons who could physically damage his sword. Chen Ping'an couldn't help but grumble. He was naturally wishing that the myriad treasures in the world would only enter his pockets and not exit them. Moreover, he was slightly different from Zhang Shanfeng in the sense that he was fundamentally a pure martial artist who focused on tempering his physique and refining his fist techniques. These things belonged to him alone and could not be taken away, and they could also be viewed as a formless type of defense. Moreover, there were also the 2 flying swords in his sword nurturing gourd that possessed boundless destructive power. Thus, Chen Ping'an didn't intend to sell or trade the small trinkets that he had seized from his enemies. After arriving at the busy Sword Water Villa, the 3 of them discovered that they were in a slightly awkward situation. There was indeed a very elderly steward Chu in the villa, but the concierge and the steward responsible for welcoming guests found a bunch of legitimate reasons to turn down the 3 strangers' request to meet Ancestor Chu. Their expressions didn't reveal anything, but it was clear that they didn't want to satisfy Chen Ping'an and his companion's request. One had to realize that Ancestor Chu was already close to 100 years old. He was a meritorious veteran who had fought alongside the villa master, and he had already stopped attending to trivial worldly matters a long time ago. After handing the Sword Water Villa to his eldest grandson, the previous villa master, the Sword Saint, became exceedingly mysterious and difficult to find. He would often travel outside for 3 to 5 years without returning to the villa. Thus, it could even be said that the highly respected Ancestor Chu was the second master of the Sword Water Villa. That being the case, could any random stranger request an audience with him? Did they view the Sword Water Villa as nothing more than a measly stall in a small town? And thus, Chen Ping'an and his companions were turned away in a lukewarm manner. Zhang Shanfeng asked Su Yuanxia whether they could offer the steward some silver coins to resolve the situation. However, Su Yuanxia smiled wryly and replied, "Casually offering silver coins to bribe people in the cultivation world is akin to giving them a slap. This is especially the case with leading cultivation forces such as the Sword Water Villa. Trying to bribe them with silver coins will only make things worse." Zhang Shanfeng smiled and suggested, "If push comes to shove, Big Brother Su can always demonstrate his saber techniques in front of the entrance. We'll definitely be invited inside as esteemed guests." In reality, the cultivation world wasn't especially complicated and mature in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. It couldn't compare to complete Reed Continent, where there were numerous top-notch swords cultivators. As a pure martial artist at the 4th tier, Su Yuanxia could already be regarded as a grandmaster who had the ability to act wantonly in small nations such as Colorful Garment Nation and Water Combing Nation. He also had a powerful weapon, and this made him even more impressive. If he hadn't been tricked and struck by the sneak attack of the young woman back in the old and run-down temple, and had fought against her head-on with his full strength, he wouldn't necessarily have lost to the so-called Mama, one of the 4 evil spirits of Water Combing Nation. Su Yuanxia stroked his beard with the palm of his hand. If things didn't work out, then he could only adopt this plan as a last resort. Zhang Shanfeng suddenly tugged at their sleeves. Su Yuanxia and Chen Ping'an turned around, only to see a huge and extravagant horse-drawn carriage slowly coming to a stop. It was very imposing, and a young girl and a burly man stepped out from the carriage. The young girl was a familiar face, none other than the demon who had caused trouble for them in the old temple. Back then, she had told Sword Saint Song Yushao that she would personally pay a visit to his Sword Water Villa. Unexpectedly, she was genuinely upholding her promise and not being perfunctory in the least. The burly man was 9 feet tall. In spite of being unarmed, his aura was overwhelming, and the esteemed guests and cultivation elites who had traveled here from all over the cultivation world all stepped back to let him through. Chen Ping'an and his companions made eye contact with the young girl. She said something to the burly man before walking over. She performed a graceful curtsy, then smiled and said, "3 gallant heroes, it was through blows that we became acquainted with each other, so why don't we share a table now that we're all guests of Sword Water Villa? Why don't we smile away our past grudges?" Su Yuanxia exchanged a glance with Chen Ping'an and Zhang Shanfeng. He then turned around and replied with a smile, "Sure thing." It wasn't long before a hunchbacked old man walked out from the villa to welcome the young girl and the burly man. His surname was Chu, and he had received a greeting card from the burly man before they had arrived. Thus, the villa didn't dare to neglect or slight them. Su Yuanxia borrowed this opportunity to deliver Song Yushao's message to the old man, who was none other than the villa's chief steward, Steward Chu. Upon hearing Su Yuanxia's words, Steward Chu immediately confirmed that this was indeed the previous villa master's manner of speech. Compared to his caution when dealing with the young girl and burly man, he appeared far more sincere and warm when dealing with Su Yuanxia and the others. Moreover, this was a critical time for the villa, so the more cultivation friends the previous villa master could make, the better. If there were enough supporters, perhaps the young villa master could solidify his position as the leader of the alliance. After entering the villa, walking through corridors, and navigating around shadow walls, the 3 of them were personally led to a large detached courtyard by Steward Chu. The villa was quite spectacular, and this was a serene and beautiful courtyard. As for the young girl and burly man, they were coincidentally given a nearby courtyard. Chen Ping'an had heard the sound of flowing water before entering the courtyard, so he asked Steward Chu about whether there was a stream nearby. As it turned out, there was a large and majestic waterfall not far from here. They could arrive at this waterfall if they exited through the back of the courtyard and followed the stone-slabbed path. This was a scenic spot in Sword Water Villa renowned throughout Watercombing Nation. After it rained, a rainbow would form across the waterfall and form a magnificent view. Su Yuanxia and Zhang Shanfeng didn't want to walk around right now, so Chen Ping'an decided to visit the waterfall by himself. Zhang Shanfeng practiced his sword techniques in the courtyard. Meanwhile, Su Yuanxia sat on a stone chair and muttered in a self-ridiculing manner. "Alrighty then, I failed to hear the crashing waterfall as a 4th-tier martial artist, yet your sensitive ears actually managed to pick it up." After walking some distance away, Steward Chu stopped in his tracks and turned around to look in the direction of the distant waterfall. Perhaps Chen Ping'an is actually an old superior grandmaster who's regained his youth, he murmured to himself. A visiting convoy arrived at Dragon Spring Prefecture. These were definitely rare and esteemed guests. The convoy was an official one from Great Sui Nation, and they kept a low profile and didn't use fancy carriages. Even so, their arrival still sent huge waves through the imperial court of the Great Li Empire. In fact, there were 2 pillar generals among the group of officials welcoming the convoy. One had the surname Yuan, and one had the surname Cao. There was also the head minister of the Ministry of Rights who had come from Mountain Cliff Academy. In addition to them, there were several influential officials from the capital. Without exception, these officials were all trusted subjects of the emperor. Prefectural overseer Wu Yuan was also among them, but he appeared far too unremarkable in comparison. The leader of the convoy from Great Sui Nation was an old man who wasn't a well-known figure. His surname was Gao, the same as the emperor, but his disposition was more like that of a storyteller who traveled around the world and called everywhere home. He didn't appear noble at all and only had a single attendant, a young girl. There were 2 other carriages, with one carrying Prince Gao Xuan and a eunuch wearing robes embroidered with pythons, and one carrying an assistant minister from the Ministry of Rights. This assistant minister had a lofty status, but his official rank wasn't actually very high. The 2 groups of people met at a relay station and only enjoyed a simple meal with refreshing tea. Afterward, they hurriedly made their way to Cloud Drape Mountain, which had just been elevated to the status of Northern Mountain. Weibo, the great mountain god of the Northern Mountain, and Cheng Shuidong, previously an official in Yellow Court Nation and now the assistant mountain master of Forest Deer Academy, patiently waited for the two convoys at the foot of Cloud Drape Mountain. The three groups converged and climbed the mountain together. The Imperial Song clan of the Great Li Empire was going to form an alliance with the Imperial Gao clan of Great Sui Nation on Cloud Drape Mountain. The two remaining empires in the northern region of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent were going to sign a 100-year pact. While the two parties went through the process of forming an alliance according to Confucian etiquette, two young boys of the same age stood facing each other. They were both princes, and one was Song Jishin. Standing behind him was his absent-minded maidservant, Zhi Gui. The other was called Gao Xuan, and standing behind him was a white-haired chief eunuch wearing a python robe. The eunuch was standing in an upright and respectful manner. Gao Xuan smiled and said, "We meet again." Song Jishin had a terrible impression of this prince, whom he had first met in Clay Vase Alley, so he didn't acknowledge him or say anything in reply. Gao Xuan had a glum expression as he said, "Fortunes ebb and flow, and you're more impressive and influential than me now." Song Jishin smiled coldly and didn't say anything. Gao Xuan turned to the slim and graceful young girl and said with a faint smile, "I'm very good friends with Chen Ping'an now. When he was in Great Sui Nation, he would often mention you whenever he talked about his hometown." Zhi Gui rolled her eyes in a forthright manner. As if remembering something, Gao Xuan looked at Song Jishin and asked, "I wanted to buy your maidservant before, and if I remember correctly, you asked for 10,000 taels of gold. Is this offer still on the table?" Song Jishin finally opened his mouth, replying, "How much does the entire Great Sui Nation cost? Why don't you name a price? When I become rich in the future, maybe I'll buy your entire nation." Gao Xuan clicked his tongue in wonder. Clothes make a person, and a saddle makes a horsetooth. Your haughty manner is truly terrifying now. "Then are you terrified to death now?" Song Jishin sneered. Gao Xuan pursed his lips, and he didn't exchange barbs with Song Jishin anymore. He turned around to look at the mountain god temple of the northern mountain that possessed a majestic aura, and he asked in a quiet voice, "If the mountain god temple of the northern mountain is here, then where is the mountain god temple of the southern mountain?" In the east mountain of the capital, where Great Sui Nation's Mountain Cliff Academy was located, the other half of the Alliance Pact was being formed in an even more secretive manner. Even though the ceremony looked relatively simple, and it was kept a complete secret from non-involved parties, the officials in the capital were all extremely anxious and tense. From the emperor to the 6 ministries, and from inside the mountains to outside the mountains, everyone was relaxed on the outside, but tense on the inside. Everyone kept a close eye on Mountain Cliff Academy. Fortunately, Assistant Mountain Master Mao Jiaodong was like an old hen looking after her chicks, and he had strongly requested the Imperial Court of Great Sui Nation not to pause the normal teaching schedule in the academy due to this matter. In the end, it was because of this that the large majority of teachers and students in the academy didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Great Sui Nation was on high alert, but they couldn't be blamed for making such a big fuss. This was because the representative from the Great Li Empire responsible for signing the East Mountain Alliance had far too powerful a background. He was none other than Qi Chan, the imperial preceptor of the Great Li Empire. 1. Grain rain refers to the 6th of the 24 solar terms. Traditionally, this solar term marks the beginning of warmer temperatures and the onset of the rainy season, making it an important period for farmers to ensure a satisfactory harvest for the rest of the year. 2. This is a saying that posits a person will appear especially energetic and impressive if they wear a good outfit. Similarly, horses will appear especially beautiful if they have a good saddle. This points to how an outfit, literal or figurative, can vastly change a person's appearance and status.